Snow fell hard against the mountains that night, the kind of snow that muffled the world into silence, leaving only the sound of wind whistling through the pines. Emma stumbled through the drifts, clutching the thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, her shoes soaked and torn. She had run farther than she thought possible, her lungs burning, but she couldn't stop, not after what she had left behind. Her stepmother's cruel words still echoed in her ears. "You're nothing but a burden, a mouth we can't afford to feed." They had driven her out like an unwanted dog, sending her into the wilderness with nowhere to go, hoping the cold would do what their cruelty could not. But Emma had survived worse, and she refused to let their hatred end her story. The storm grew worse as she pressed deeper into the mountains, each gust stealing the last of her strength until at last, the faint glow of firelight flickered through the trees. With trembling legs, she pushed toward it, stumbling into a small clearing where a cabin stood strong against the storm. Smoke curled from its chimney and the scent of burning cedar filled the air. Her heart leapt with both fear and hope. She didn't know who lived here, but she had no other choice. She raised a weak hand and knocked. The door opened with a groan, and there he stood, a man as rugged and unyielding as the peaks themselves. Tall, broad-shouldered, his beard thick. His flannel shirt stretched across a chest like carved stone. His eyes were sharp and steady, the kind of eyes that saw right through the lies and scars of the world. This was no ordinary man. He was the kind they whispered about in town, a man who lived alone in the mountains, far from society, rumored to be as wild as the land he called home. For a moment Emma faltered, but then his gaze swept over her shivering frame, and without a word he stepped aside. "Get in," he said, his voice low and deep like rolling thunder. She hesitated before stepping inside, warmth rushing to her face as the fire's heat washed over her. The cabin smelled of pine and leather, walls lined with tools, furs, and shelves filled with jars of food. It was a home built by calloused hands, one that spoke of survival and solitude. Emma opened her mouth, but her voice cracked. "Please, I don't want to trouble you." "I can sleep in the barn if you'll just allow it." Her plea was desperate, her pride clinging to the idea of not overstepping. The man turned, his brow furrowing as though the very idea insulted him. His arms folded across his chest, and his voice came out like iron. "You'll sleep next to me." The words froze her more than the storm outside. She blinked, her heart pounding, unsure of his meaning. But he continued, softer now, though still firm. "The barn is no place for a woman in this weather. Wolves come down when the snow gets this thick. You think I'd put you out there with them? Not a chance. You'll stay where it's warm, here." Tears stung Emma's eyes at the unexpected kindness. No one had ever defended her like that, not her father, not her family. She had always been the one pushed aside, unwanted, forgotten. And yet this man, this stranger, had decided she was worth protecting without even knowing her name. He pulled a blanket from a chair, thick wool smelling faintly of cedar and smoke, and draped it over her shoulders. "Sit," he ordered gently, pointing to the seat closest to the fire. "You're frozen through. I'll make something hot." As she sat, watching him move around the cabin, she realized how skilled he was at the simple, life-saving tasks. He ladled stew from a pot simmering on the hearth, poured hot tea into a tin cup and set both before her. "Eat," he said. "You'll need your strength." The food warmed her from the inside, and for the first time in years, Emma felt something like safety wrap around her. She dared to glance up at him as he sat across the table, his hands rough, veins standing out like roots, but his gaze was steady, not cruel, not judging. Between hesitant bites, she told him her name, where she had come from, and the cruelty she had fled. He listened in silence, his jaw tight, his eyes darkening, with anger she knew wasn't for her but for what she had endured. When she finished, her shame hung heavy in the air. "I'm sorry," she whispered, looking down at her hands. "I've brought trouble to your doorstep. If you want me gone in the morning, I'll understand." The man leaned forward, his voice steady and commanding. "Look at me." She did reluctantly, her eyes meeting his piercing gaze. "You are not a burden, not here, not ever again." The word struck something deep in her chest, a wound that had never been healed. And in that moment, the cabin didn't feel like a stranger's home anymore. It felt like refuge. That night, as the storm raged harder, rattling the windows and shaking the roof, Emma lay wrapped in furs by the fire. The mountain man stretched, out on a bedroll close enough to keep watch, but far enough to give her peace. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, It was the first time she had slept without fear in years. Outside, the wilderness roared, but inside she was safe. In the days that followed, Emma learned the rhythm of life in the mountains. The man whose name she discovered was Caleb rose with the dawn, splitting wood, checking traps, tending to the animals that sheltered nearby. He showed her how to help, never treating her like she was weak, but guiding her with patient strength. Each day she grew stronger, her spirit mending piece by piece. She laughed again, something she thought she had forgotten how to do. And every time she faltered, every time her past threatened to pull her down, Caleb was there with that steady voice, reminding her she was not alone. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Emma turned to him. "Why did you let me stay? You didn't even know me." Caleb stared into the flames for a long time before answering. "Because I know what it's like to be left with nothing. I know what it's like to be told you don't belong anywhere. No one deserves that, not you. And as long as I draw breath, you'll never hear those words again." His promise settled deep into her soul, stronger than any vow she had ever known. The storm eventually passed, but Emma never asked to leave. She no longer longed for the place that had cast her out, because she had found something greater here, a home, a protector, and perhaps something even more tender growing between them. And though the world outside was still harsh and cruel, within the walls of that mountain cabin, she had finally found warmth that went beyond firelight. So when she had first begged, "I'll sleep in the barn," she hadn't known that a single man's refusal would change everything. That night when Caleb had said, "You'll sleep next to me," he wasn't just offering her shelter from the storm. He was offering her belonging, safety, and a place in a heart as strong as the mountains themselves. And from that night forward, Emma was no longer the girl who had been cast out. She was the woman who had been chosen, by the mountain, by fate, and by the man who would stand by her side forever. The storm eventually gave way to clearer skies, but for Emma, the mountains were still a strange, untamed world. She woke the next morning to the smell of coffee brewing and the crackle of firewood. For a moment she thought it was all a dream, the cabin, the warmth, the man who had taken her in. But when she sat up and saw Caleb, shirt sleeves rolled, pouring steaming coffee into a tin cup, reality struck her heart with quiet relief. He turned when he heard her stir. "Morning," he said simply, sliding the cup across the table toward her. Emma wrapped her hands around the warmth, still too shy to meet his eyes. Life with Caleb was not easy, but it was real. The days were long, filled with work that demanded strength. Yet each task he taught her gave her something she had never felt before. Purpose. She learned to stack wood properly, to mend tools, to keep a fire alive through the night. At first her body ached, her hands blistered. But Caleb never mocked her or called her weak. He only watched with that steady patience and said, "You'll get stronger." And she did. Slowly, the thin, frightened girl who had knocked on his door was replaced by someone she barely recognized. In the cracked mirror by the wash basin, a woman with determination in her eyes. One morning, as they were hauling water from the frozen stream, Caleb paused, his sharp gaze scanning the tree line. Emma followed his eyes, her heart pounding. "What is it?" she whispered. He set the buckets down, his hand instinctively brushing the handle of the axe he carried at his belt. "Tracks," he murmured. Too close to the cabin, she swallowed hard. "Wolves?" He shook his head. "Men." That word sent a chill through her that no winter could rival. She had thought she had left people behind. The cruel laughter of her stepmother, the harsh scorn of neighbors who never saw her as more than baggage. But Caleb knew the wilderness better than anyone. If men were moving this high into the mountains, it wasn't for anything good. For days after, he was more watchful, teaching her how to stay silent in the woods, how to duck into the shadows if strangers came. Emma trusted him completely, but fear crept back into her heart. Not fear of the wilderness, fear of being dragged back to a life she thought she had escaped. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Caleb's jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable. Emma, sensing his tension, set her cup down. "You don't have to keep me here," she said quietly. "I don't want to be the reason trouble comes to your door." His gaze snapped to hers, sharp as a blade. "You think I'd send you back out there? Not a chance. Whatever's out there, I'll face it. But you're staying." His words left no room for argument. But what struck Emma most was the certainty in them. No one had ever fought for her before, not once. And though fear still gnawed at her, a spark of courage grew stronger. The first test came not long after. A knock rattled the cabin door one night, loud and aggressive. Emma froze where she sat, but Caleb rose with steady steps, his axe in one hand. When he opened the door, two rough-looking men stood there, their clothes ragged, eyes hungry and mean. "Storm caught us on the trail," one said, his tone sly. "We just need shelter for the night." Caleb's jaw tightened. "The storm's passed. Keep moving." The men smirked, their gaze sliding past him to Emma by the fire. One of them grinned. "Didn't know you had company, mountain man." "Pretty thing, ain't she?" Emma's breath caught, fear clawing up her throat. But Caleb stepped forward, blocking their view entirely. His voice was steel. "Leave now," something in his tone, in the sheer power of his stance, made the men falter. They spat curses, muttered threats, but they turned and stumbled back into the darkness. Caleb shut the door with finality, sliding the heavy bar across it. For a long time, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the pounding of Emma's heart. Finally, she whispered, They saw me."
"What if they come back?"
Caleb knelt before her, his hands firm on her shoulders, grounding her. "Then they'll find me waiting. You're safe. Emma, I won't let anyone take you." His words carried no boast, only truth. In that moment, something shifted between them, something unspoken yet undeniable. Emma's fear softened, replaced by a fierce, aching gratitude. The days turned into weeks, and Emma found herself not only surviving, but thriving. She laughed when Caleb taught her to fish through a hole in the ice, her clumsy hands dropping the line more than once. She blushed when he guided her grip on the axe, his large hand over hers, steadying her swing. The cabin, once just a refuge, became something more. It became theirs. And though Caleb still carried the